Sponsored Name Segmenter is one of the main tools that you will use to both report on and perform functions on your sponsored names. It is a query tool and is similar to the other segmenters in Denari like Name Segmenter, Pledge Segmenter, etc. in that it uses sponsored name record fields as filters and outputs a list of sponsored names with their various characteristics or fields. It is different than the other segmenters, however, in that it can also perform functions on your sponsored names. I'll explain further later. It's important to highlight here that Sponsored Name Segmenter will not give you information about sponsors. It has a very strict purpose, and that is to output sponsored name information. We'll see later how you can use Sponsored Name Segmenter with Pledge Segmenter to get information about sponsors. So what does a sponsored name segment do for you? Let's say that you want to see a list of all of your children or adults who live in a specific community. You can create a segment that will give you just those sponsored names. You could expand that to get a list of sponsored names from that community that are not yet sponsored. And to take it a step further, you could get a list of sponsored names from that community who are available, who are also in the 5th grade. So you can begin to see the possibilities. To create a segment, click on the Reports button here on the left. Click on Query Tools and then Sponsored Name Segmenter. Segments can be used and used again and again, and here you see a list of the ones that someone has created in the past. We could search for and select one that is already here and run it again if it fits our needs. But we'll create a new one by clicking on the Add New button. Just like all other records that you create in Denari, you need to give your segment a description and a code. The description is for you. When you come back to the list of segments we saw on the previous page, seeing the description there will tell you what this segment is about. The code is for Denari. It tells Denari that this segment is different from any others, so it must be unique. You can't have two segments with the same code. Now let's skip down to the bottom of the page below the line. From the line down, we see all of the filter options. Just like all segments in Denari, if you put in no filters, you get all names. If we ran this segment right now, we would get a list of all sponsored name records. Sometimes that's useful, but most of the time you want to focus on a segment of those names, so you will use one or more filters to refine that list. For example, if we want a list of names that are available, we can go to the System Status field and choose Equal To, and then put the letter A in the low value field. Now, when we run the segment, we will get a list of names whose system status is A for available. If we wanted the list to only include those names that are available from a specific community, we can keep our system status filter and move down to the community field. We can choose Equal To here again and then select a community. So we could search for here and find the community that we want. We could add grade to that if we wanted to find the names from that community that are available and in a specific grade. The rule here is that you use only the filters that you need to produce the list you want. You're starting with all names and reaching into the pot of names to pull out the ones you want based on your filters. Most of the fields here are fairly self-explanatory. They're the fields you find on the sponsored name record, and you're simply querying the values you've already entered into those fields. Two fields that can cause some confusion, however, are status and system status. These refer to the two fields on the sponsored name record using the same name. System status is the field that Denari populates based on specific conditions, and the values for this field will be A, AP, AS, S, or D. The status field is the one that you can use if you choose to set an internal status that may be different from the one that Denari determines. You'll need to be careful here to query the fields you want. If you're querying Denari's field, then you'll use system status. If you're querying your field, then use status. While we're here, let's talk about the operators. They are part of the query statement that you're setting up. For example, let's look at the system status field because it's the one you'll use frequently. In the operator field, we see equal to here at the top of the list. If we choose that, then we will put a single value in the low value field. We don't need anything in the high value field when we're using equal to. As mentioned earlier, the values for this field are things like A, S, etc. They are the values that Denari uses in the sponsored name record. A stands for available. So if we want a list of sponsored names that have only that value, we can put an A in the low value field. So our query statement will be saying, give me all names with a system status equal to A. We also have not equal to. So if we use that, we'll get all names that don't have a system status of A. There are times when you want names that are available, and there are really 3 system status codes for that, A, AP, and S. The AS code will only be used if you allow multiple sponsors, but let's not get confused with that right now. If a name record has an A in the code field, that means they are available to be sponsored. So in this case, we could choose between as the operator and put A in the low value field and AS in the high value field. So in this case, it would give us any sponsored name with an A, an AP, or an AS. Any value in the range from A to AS alphabetically will be in the output. And we also have not between. So that would give us any sponsored name that doesn't have a value in that range. Another operator that you'll use from time to time is in. It stands for in the list. It allows you to pick and choose values from a list that are not necessarily in a range. For example, let's say we want sponsored names with a system status of AP, S, and D. I'm not sure why you would want those, but this will show us how in works. We can't use between as our operator because if we use a range of AP to S, we will also get AS because it fits alphabetically within that range. So we can use in to pick them out of the list. So for that, we'll choose in as our operator, and then in the low value fields, we'll enter the values like this. Notice that the values are surrounded by a single quote, separated by commas with no spaces. That then will give us those sponsored names with those statuses and will not include A or AS. We also have not in, and again, that will give us the reverse. We get everyone who does not have one of those values. There are also several other operators like greater than, less than, etc. They again work alphabetically or numerically. So greater than A would be any value alphabetically higher than A. There's another operator at work on the page, and it's called the AND operator, A-N-D. As I said earlier, all of the fields below the line are filters, and they are all optional. But each filter that you use has an AND operator between them. It works like this. Let's say that we have selected equal to in the system status field and put an A in the low value field. Now let's go down to the country field and choose equal to there, and then select a country from the drop-down list. Now, when we run the segment, only those sponsored names that match the system status criteria and the community criteria will be in the output, or country criteria. The more filters you add to the page, the more ands there are, which usually makes your output list smaller because more things need to be true to match the criteria. Let's continue with some of the fields that need some explanation. The first is top X, and it's really misnamed. It is used to get a list of names at random, not necessarily the top group. For example, let's say you're going to an event and you want to take 10 names with you to try to get sponsored. You can pick selected names, or you can enter the number 10 in this field. When you run the segment, you will get just 10 names at random. Later, we'll see how we can check those 10 out to an event or a donor. The pledge fund code field can also be confusing. Over on the sponsored name page is a page field called designation. If you haven't discovered this yet, designation and fund are synonymous in Denari. The designation field in the sponsored name page is used to select a fund so that when a sponsorship or pledge is created through online community, Denari will use that fund when it creates the pledge record. The pledge fund code field here, however, is not filtering on the field from the sponsored name record. It is filtering on the fund codes selected in the pledge. In many, if not most cases, they are the same. However, it is possible for someone to set up a pledge manually or internally and select a different fund than the one selected in the sponsored name record. This can be even more confusing because all of the filters here in the sponsored name segment filter on the fields from the sponsored name record. This is the one exception. It's looking at the fund code in the pledge. So to sum up this portion of the video, the fields found below the line in the sponsored name segment are optional fields. They are optional in that you don't need to use any of them. If you create a segment with no filters, you get all sponsored names. You will use only the filters that are relevant to what you want. If you want a list of sponsored names that are checked out to an event, then you will use only that filter. Finally, remember that sponsored name segmenter will give you sponsored name information. It does not give you information about pledges, donors, or gift. We'll talk more about that later. So let's stop here, and when we pick this up in session 2, we'll go above the line.